Hello, welcome back to Anime on the Sea to Sky, where my upload schedule is just as erratic as my work and sleep, but we're just gonna have to keep moving forward and try to figure that out as we go along. Well, I'm back out on the West Coast. I was glad I was able to have the opportunity to go visit a lot of family and friends out in the East, settle up for a couple of different towns through Ontario, and had some come up from the States as well, so it was a really nice change of pace and a really nice way to kind of end off the year and start again for a new one. But now that I'm back on the West Coast and things are going to be getting a little funky, I'll try to keep things once again going to a 2-week or a bi-weekly schedule, even though I know that that's been incredibly erratic over the past 6 weeks. But I just have to keep on keeping on, because at least I have enough to talk about through the majority of the transition to the next season, as well as things surrounding it, and even things that are outside of anime, which is what we're going to be talking about today. But at least over the past couple of weeks, a handful of things to pop up going through now is that we're definitely coming up upon awards season, since we've already gone through the Golden Globes, the nominees for the Oscars have been led through, and then to top it all off, Crunchyroll has been going through and leading in its nominations for its anime awards ceremony, as well as our anime's subreddit going through and doing the same. And even though I do believe that they are better in every single regard to Crunchyroll, it's just that, I don't know, Crunchyroll's like the only quote-unquote mainstream piece that we have to at least go through and honor this as a worldwide audience outside of Japan. But I don't know, it's still kind of shit, and that'll get its entire episode besides the point. But yeah, at least for the animated section inside of the Golden Globes, Del Toro's Pinocchio was the one who ended up taking home the grand prize over things such as Inu-Oh, Puss in Boots, and Marcel the Shell with Shoes On. And that's completely understandable. It's the only thing, because it's, of course, the nomination for the Oscars does do its fucking job in the sense that I would like to go through and at least see every single one before the award ceremony is over. And between all of those that are going to be lining up, there's still at least 2 to 3 that are on my list. But at least to this point, Pinocchio's one of them, and I still haven't seen it to the degree that everybody else has been giving it praise, and everybody has been a huge fan of its stop-motion animation and just the overall eeriness and dystopia that it actually gives off. So at least if there was anybody to take home the award, that'd be great. Considering that outside of that, there are no anime films that are going to be lining up again for the 95th Oscars Best Picture Award. Which, to be fair, I'm not too upset about, considering that if Goodbye Donglese was the one that ended up taking home that nomination, I would have been that's the only way I would have been incredibly annoyed. But considering that the only 3 major ones that we could have put on the table were, in this case, Donglese, Drifting Home, which I still think is a really good film that everybody should watch on Netflix, but I'm kind of disappointed that they weren't able to give Inu-Oh a shot, considering that if there's anything that anybody inside of the old and decrepit Academy agrees on, is that they were all huge fans of rock concerts, and I can only imagine that if they ended up giving it a watch, I wouldn't be surprised if it would have charmed them at least a little. But regardless, the nominees for the category itself are, of course, Del Toro's Pinocchio, Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, ain't that a fucking tongue twister, Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, Puss in Boots' Last Wish, The Sea Beast, and Turning Red. So at least at this point, I still need to get to Pinocchio, I still need to get to Puss in Boots, and The Sea Beast is the only one out of this entire group that I still have no idea what it is, so I'm really curious to see how that's going to turn around. I don't think it's done by either a studio outside of Spain or Ireland, so I'm going to have to wait and see how that ends up lining up, but I don't know, at least I really don't think there was anything major for any of these shows not getting nominated or movies getting nominated, so it's fine. We'll move along. I'm really curious to see how the next year is going to be lining up, considering that we're still going to be getting a lot of Shonen Fare, we're going to get Makoto Shinkai's new film, and there's going to be a lot of stuff leading through into 2023. But outside of that, in terms of shows, we're already getting an announcement for the next project of Main Abyss, which to me is just crazy, considering that we ended up getting that at the very end of the summer season, I believe, and so all I'd heard at the end of this, where it's like, hey, guess what? The author is essentially going through and making his release schedule a lot like mine, very slipshod, very just indiscretionary and out of nowhere. Like, apparently we're only 4 to 5 chapters behind the actual story here to where the Scorching Sun season ended. And so now they're already thinking, and they've already got a green light for the next production to be going through instead of waiting another 4 years for, well, to be fair, they've only given it the green light, so I wouldn't be surprised if it takes another 3 to 4 to go. So two things are going to happen. Either the mangaka is going to continuously go forward and start pumping out chapters a lot more frequently, or he's going to be working very close with the production to essentially do a cooperative project to kind of make sure the story lines in set with the events of the actual manga, or just both in this case, or both could happen. So I'm kind of curious to see how the rest of that is going to be moving forward over the next couple of years, because it was a really good season for Scorching Sun, and continuously moving on. If there's anything that I'm happy that is going to continuously moving forward and getting another set of sequels, even though apparently the story is reaching its conclusion, I'd really love to see how this story ends up. And then even though, considering that I am not watching anything, barely anything of this season, there is going to be one more piece that is going to be jumping in late into the winter 2023 season, and that's going to be Aggretsuko Season 5, which apparently is going to be the final season released on the show. So that's going to be coming out February 16th for its worldwide debut on Netflix, and I really don't know how this is going to change. I'm not going to watch the trailer. I'm not going to go through and kind of just give myself a couple of headcanons or give anything leading into guesses about what this final season's going to be, because to be fair, I do think that seasons 2 and 3 were great, but season 4 really did just kind of like take one step forward and 2 steps back, and we have no idea like what the main couple's doing, what the rest of the crew around them is going to be leading up to, and I just kind of hope that we get a decently happy conclusion, whether or not Retsuko is going to like stay with her own job and how her relationship with the rest of the people in her work is going to go. I don't know. We're just going to have to wait and see and decide on what that's going to pop up with in February. But another thing that I'm really excited to see get announced is that Kyoto Animation is going to be holding a 10th anniversary project for Tomoko Market. And considering that I do still believe that Hyoka is probably the best work that Kyoto Animation's ever done, to be fair, I think that personally Tomoko Market is my favorite of their entire catalog, but I mean Market and Love Story consistently. And so to see whether or not we're going to get, say, an OVA, a post, time skip, and we see how the characters are doing a couple of years down the line, what everybody's doing for work or for school, or if it's just going to be everybody coming back together for a weekend just to kind of see how the rest of the crew is doing. All I know is that it's going to be really fun to see the rest of this cast come back, and I would imagine, considering that's going to be the case, where we might have the opportunity to see Yamada Naoko come back and helm another project at Kyoto Animation. I'm really curious to see what they're going to adapt or what they're going to create in this case. Well, not necessarily adapt it, because they ended up making this as their own original work, but I'm still really excited to see the rest of these characters come back together and actually have some fun. So to get this season's initial reactions out of the way, there is easily nothing for me to talk about to essentially push this episode further and beyond its limit, considering that I'm basically, barring Aggretsuko that's going to be coming out later in February, so it'll technically be show number 5 that I'm watching this season. Maybe the same thing happens with Akiba Maid War, where I really see a lot of hubbub and a lot of notifications and a lot of people talking about it, considering that I only jumped into Akiba back in like episode 8 or week 8 or 9. And so maybe there's still an opportunity for a show to go through and give me that opportunity to jump into it, but currently nothing's really knocking my socks off 3 to 4 weeks into the season. But besides that, I went from watching 14 shows last season to 4. And 2 of those shows are basically just runoff from the previous season. I'm still watching Blue Lock. The magic is kind of waning because now that the energy around the World Cup is over, then I'm still not really caring too much about the main characters. I'm still waiting on like the next piece, the next big climax and the next soccer match to at least go through and push the characters forward in something that's the rest of it. I just don't really know. We see the top 3 in one of the most recent episodes, and it's just not really that big of a deal. Like, they give us who is apparently going to be like the top 3 characters inside of the show in terms of their soccer prowess, but it's just kind of like, I don't care. The cast is just way too big, way too strenuous. Like, you can't latch yourself onto everybody, and it makes you really strained when you're trying to figure out who you care for, who you want to advance, who you want to go home, like, because the main character I don't necessarily think is that interesting, and I'm really more curious to see what the rest of the crew on the side characters is going to be bringing forward. But I just nothing about any of them is still sticking. I don't have a single character inside of the show to latch onto, and for some reason I'm still watching it, because at least I guess at that point I'm definitely a completionist. If I'm already 13, 14 episodes in, I might as well just keep going, considering it's only going to be taking up 15 to 20 minutes of my time a week. That's beside the point. I'll just keep letting it go, and hopefully there is a character or something that leads up to knock my socks off and actually get me reinvested back into the show. So only time will tell. I am curious to see how the next arc of My Hero is going to get adapted. So far, they're doing a really good job on the falling action of essentially what happened as one of the biggest pieces and one of the biggest shifts inside of the manga in general. And they essentially just had one of the smallest or quickest falling action pieces inside of the entire series, considering that there is going to be no rest, there's going to be no festival, there's going to be no licensing, there's going to be nothing that's going to be jumping in as a sequel arc to like take away from the pace that the previous arc set. And that is immediately what we're jumping into. Although, to be fair, considering that we did end up getting what was essentially a pseudo recap in episode 13 or 14, and I'm really curious to see how they're going to be moving forward with Deku into this new arc and how it's going to be pushed forward. Although I finally found where Yutaka Nakamura was. I was waiting the entire first half of this season to be like, okay, where's going to be the Yutapon cut? Where's going to be the Nakamura powers? Like, when essentially is this going to go forward? And nothing happened in the entire arc, and then the second opening that happened inside of the season, it just popped up out of nowhere. Like, the Yutapon cut just happened in the middle of the opening, and it was like 25 seconds long, and it was crazy, and it was a really good cut, and it's going to be a phenomenal piece to consistently go forward, because I do like the new opening besides the cut that ends up getting shown, but it's still like just icing on the cake to see that was where he ended up putting his stuff, because I guess at this point he can just do whatever cut he wants. He can decide on whichever pieces, considering that he's always just jumping between different scenarios and different fights and different points in the story. So considering that he was able to go through and have one of his cuts be the premiere cut inside of this new opening, I would imagine that he definitely had a say in where he was going to be putting that. I'm just hoping that that's not the only cut that we get to see him, and I'm hoping that at least at some point we'll be able to have another opportunity to see his animation at work in the second half of this season. Now, the next sequel that is one of the two shows that I'm actually watching this season is Vinland Saga Season 2, or Farmland Saga, or Harvest Moon, or just whichever other farming allegory that you want to take. That's all I've heard about this second season. It's because I think, what was it? The initial season came out back in 2019 or 2020. And so it did a really good job with the prologue of the story. And I was really trying to figure out what essentially I wanted to do in terms of either immediately jumping to the manga or thinking, what am I going to do? Should I wait for the second season? And considering that if they were just going to be as blunt as saying, hey, guess what? This is the prologue, I was definitely expecting them to line up and have a second season in the works. Even though it's not done by WIT, this time it's being done by MAPPA. And regardless, considering the amount of projects that MAPPA has ended up taking off of WIT Studios, there's not really too much of a change in art direction or character design. It is very similar to what we had from the previous season, and so it's still moving forward. It is still kind of slow to get you reinvested and get you back into a different set of characters. Some have aged, some haven't, some are dead, some are alive, but you have to bring yourself back into this world, and currently we are in a much more passive version of that story. So I'm curious to see if they're just going to continue on with this kind of theme and pacing, or if there's going to be a piece of action that is going to be lining up at some point in the future. So we'll just have to wait and see. And now the one and only show that I was truly excited for, to kind of see what they were going to do with this kind of, not adaptation, but this kind of remastering of its old predecessor, which is Trigun Stampede. because I initially thought it was going to be something that would either be like a remake of the original story, or not really a remake, a remaster that ended up continuing on after the original show ended and leading us into something. I believe Rampage is the full title, or no, Trigun the Maxim. No, Trigun Maximum. That's the name of the full manga. And so I was curious if they were going to be doing something along those lines, but it's completely like remade. It's an entirely different story. Entirely, the setting is still the same on the planet, but the initial concepts and the pasts of the main characters of the two mains are the same, but then everybody else is different. Considering that Meryl's different, her partner's different. The only one that we don't know at this point is Wolfwood, but apparently he's supposed to be a grave digger instead of a priest. So I have no idea how he's going to go, but I'm really curious to see how they're going to be bringing his relationship with Vash back into the works. After the first 3 episodes, I still can say that I did enjoy my time, and Studio Orange is just at the forefront of what CG productions are able to do inside of the animated medium. But I just don't know about Knives being introduced so quickly into the story, because you have to essentially latch yourself onto Vash and the people who end up latching onto him in turn, but it does have a very strong 3-episode rule thing. So even if you haven't watched a single episode of Trigun or read a single page of the manga, I do believe that if you decided to come in completely blind and just go for the first 3 episodes, then you'll have a pretty good idea about whether or not you like the show. Because Knives is still the same kind of sociopath and megalomaniac that we've had in the previous series, but he is much more of a god. He is much more of a present threat rather than one that was just hiding in the shadows and looming over and pulling all the strings behind everybody else. He was very similar in gun skill and build and just powers to Vash. And that's what made them really good foils and mirrors of each other. But now he is literally a god. He is, with the technology that he uses around the rest of this world and this barren planet, it's just, considering, I'm not too shocked that he decided to be the one that ends up stepping up first, and he was the one that ended up, bringing himself into the limelight to show everybody what he is capable of. But it's going to make me a lot more tentative leading into his future conflicts with Vash, because Vash has absolutely nothing on Knives when it comes to prowess. Vash is a very, very, very skilled gunslinger, but I could see him having a chance in a fight with Knives in the previous series. Now, I don't know how they are going to frame their conflict and their future fights between the two of them, because Knives is just what he is on the tin, and what he is fucking terrifying and a real force of nature that I can't see anybody in the show being able to stop. So, I don't know. I'm going to move forward because I'm still enjoying it. I just don't know how the future conflicts with Vash and Wolfwood and the rest of the crew are going to be played out through the rest of the story. So, only time will tell. Now, to get through the live-action portion of this episode, considering that I had a lot of time on my hands leading in through Ontario, and so I was able to catch up on a handful of shows that I wanted to watch, and some that were just lining up in the midst of December. But I guess we'll get the latest season of Letterkenny out of the way. It was fine. The first 2 were a little shaky for me to get into, but I really started enjoying seeing the rest of the crew and what essentially they were up to over the next 4 episodes to kind of lean that up. I think seeing the previous Shamrockettes go through and jump into their coaching roles was probably my favorite episode of the show, and then second leading into the influenzas or the influencers. But it's just everything outside of that, it was fine. It's not that I disliked it, it's just that when they say that they ended up filming both of these seasons back to back, this season and last season, it definitely makes sense. considering they were throwing out ideas onto a board and then they were going to make an episode out of it and see how it played out. And I think it more went 50-50 in this season, but there's not a lot else going on. And considering that now, this was like season 10, 9 or 10, it's really, they're really stretching it out to kind of figure out what other ideas that they can do and like keep the formula fresh and engaging. But if they go forward and make a new, or leading into the next season, because I don't know if they're going to be doing the same thing where they shoot 2 seasons back to back, or if they decide to just go all in on this one. I'm curious to see, although I am still glad that at this point, Shoresy's first season was really enjoyable, really fun, had a blast. I'm pretty sure I already said that already, but at this point, I am much more looking forward to Shoresy's second season than the next season of Letterkenny. And I guess on the flight back, I ended up giving myself a watch to Bullet Train. It wasn't a Guy Ritchie flick, but it really felt in spirit, like that's how they wanted to do it. But in this case, it was set in Japan. It was over the top. I mean, this was very, very anime-like, especially like you have to suspend your disbelief entirely for Brad Pitt's character, considering how much happens around him and how much convenience goes through. But if you literally just push all that aside and understand where it's like, look, this is fucking crazy. Everybody's along for the ride. It's a train full of assassins and everybody's trying to one-up each other. And the banter is really good. The back and forth is stellar. The set pieces like really start ramping up towards the end of the movie. And it is just a really fun time. If you are looking for just over-the-top action, witty banter, and not necessarily, I don't think the fight scenes were probably the best one. It was definitely the character interactions that carried the majority of the story. But considering the large cast and how each of them were able to make themselves memorable in every other aspect, it's definitely in the spirit of Guy Ritchie, and I really enjoyed the ride all the way through. So if you're looking for like a crazy story leading in through the rest of it and the annals of Japan, go for it. I would definitely recommend giving it a watch. And topping the rest of that off, I was able to go through and watch the first episode of The Last of Us television series. I have not played any of these games. It's been 9 years, I believe, since the release of the first version of this game, like back on the PlayStation. And over those 9 years, I've had information drip fed to me, and I've watched video essays, and I've like gone through, and I know the major plot beats of the story leading forward, but considering that was the case, I was still surprised as to how well they set up the world, how much of it is post-apocalyptic, and what essentially everybody has to do and get around to survive, and what the landscape is leading inside of the separate countries that makes it such a trying and treacherous journey to at least go through and try to just live in this sense, because it's very, very hard for Joel in this case to just even find a reason to live, and he's only got his brother that he's really looking out for because everybody else is gone. The fact that I'm really curious to see how his relationship with Ellie is going to develop and how the rest of that's going to be pushing the story forward. But at least what I can say is that they did a really good job setting up the world, and if this is going to be, I guess, considering it is a quote-unquote winter seasonal show, since we're going week by week every Sunday, I'm really curious to see how the rest of this show is going to be pushing forward, because I don't know. I know that both games in The Last of Us are really, really long, and I don't think that they'll be able to go. It's definitely not going to be a one-season thing. It's definitely going to be either 2 or 3 seasons to get through the first game. I've heard rumors that they're going to adapt everything, as in they're just going to go through and adapt straight through The Last of Us and then The Last of Us Part 2. I don't know how that's going to be playing out in terms of how many seasons. If I had to guess, based on the game time that is actually moving forward and the only important bits, then we'll probably get 2 full seasons of The Last of Us to cover the first game, and then whatever they do afterwards is definitely up to their discretion. So, I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. I really enjoyed it. I would definitely recommend people giving this a watch and jumping on to the week-by-week schedule along with the rest of the seasonals that we have, so just go for it. And the final live-action piece that I'm going to be able to cover, which definitely took me a while, and it was a roller coaster for sure. There were a couple of ups and downs. I was thrown for a loop quite a few times, but I was finally able to go through and watch the first season of The House of the Dragon. And so this is totally spoiler-free. leading into the rest of this, at the end of the day, there were moments where I didn't know where the story was going, and there's just a lot of ways that the show ends up just throwing you for a loop and then just changing up the characters, changing up the time, changing up how the majority of the dynamics inside of the story goes. And it does give you a lot of emotional whiplash to try and figure out who you really care for and who you want to succeed at the end of the day. But it really was able to sink its claws into me towards the end of the first season. It was a really, really good first season of a franchise that I honestly didn't believe I had any love left for. The first episode definitely gets you into it, and you realize, yes, this is Game of Thrones. This is the pace, the theming, the character dynamics, the setting that you've all come to expect in some of the better seasons of that show. This is thankfully not something that is in the final 6 seasons. It is definitely, or the final 3 seasons, it's definitely more akin to the first 5. I really, really did enjoy the first and the final episode leading into what the future conflicts were going to be. Paddy Considine is just easily the highlight of that entire show. His dynamic with his brother, trying to hold a peaceful kingdom, just all of it together, even though the rest of the world does throw everything they have at him. A lot of his choices were not the best choices for sure, but it's just the way he is able to portray this character, this king, a king in full blood and title and stature and just will. He was easily the best part of this show. His relationships and how he's able to build everything around him, whether it's through his misdeeds or whether it's his mistakes and his problems, but the way he's able to keep a kingdom together throughout the entire season was just phenomenal. I really, really enjoyed his performance, and he was easily the highlight. I mean, Matt Smith, it's, I never did watch Morbius, so I don't know if this role is, I was trying to compare his role here to Morbius, but even I couldn't get that out of my fucking mouth because I really can't. I can't even joke about that stuff. I don't know, the joke is really old and past its prime, but I really did enjoy his chaotic energy and how he just loves to ride the fine line of just trepidation, stress, and chaos, because that definitely seems that is where he is his most alive. That is something that really keeps him on edge and keeps him as an interesting character, regardless of his relationship with his family, with his friends, with the rest of the people that he tries to use and manipulate. He's easily the most complex inside the rest of these characters, but the rest of the cast for sure is able to carry their own weight in spades. I really enjoyed everybody revolving around it. Rhaenyra, everybody along this entire show is able to bring their A game and make you realize what was lost and what you've been missing for years and years and years of this franchise. It just made me fall back in love with the world as a whole. I really enjoyed this season, and I don't know how much they're saying that House of the Dragon is going to be 3 to 4 seasons long. That's what they're thinking they're going to need in order to cover the entire book. I'm really curious to see how they're going to be moving this forward, but considering I would say it would be the first 3 episodes were great. The middle 4, really just, you don't know where it's going. You're trying to figure out or find your footing, find the people you care about, find the characters that are legitimately interesting, and see how they grow and how they adapt. And by the time the major players inside of this conflict reach their ideal selves towards the end of the first season, the board has been laid out and everybody's bringing their A game. And I really do enjoy the cast that we've been set up with leading into these next few seasons, because at the end of the day, I really did enjoy the first season of House of the Dragon, and without a doubt, the next seasons that are going to be popping up revolving around this franchise, I didn't think that they could do it, but now I'm all in, and I'm going to be really curious to see how the rest of the story is going to go, and how the rest of House of the Dragon is going to unfold and set the rest of the land of Westeros ablaze. Well, at least now I'm going to be able to go through and catch up on a couple of ideas. There are a few things that are going to be leading into February, so I don't know what that's going to have in store for me for the rest of the month, so I'm going to try and get myself back on the bi-weekly schedule and see how the rest of that goes, considering there's a really good set of ideas that I've got on the backlog, and since I'm in the middle of the season, that gives me most of the time that I need in order to get out what I want to talk about and have a couple of things that have been sitting on my backlog. So, I mean, thankfully, both the amount of shows that I'm watching right now, the backlog is huge. The amount of ideas I want to lead up has a huge backlog as well. And I'm really curious to see how the rest of February and March are going to go and see how 2023 unfolds. So we'll just have to wait and see. Cheers. Have a good one.